see, in Jesus' day, there were cultural walls in place to divide people one from another. Issues of nationality, ethnicity, race, and gender were firmly entrenched. It would be very difficult to share the truth of one group to cross over to another. But there Jesus was, meeting with the Samaritan woman. And she remarked about how difficult that must have been for Jesus to reach her. How is it that you, a Jew, ask water from me, a Samaritan woman? And John in the Gospel has this parenthetical explanatory note. For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Think of the Jews and Samaritans as the Hatfields and McCoys on steroids. In Jesus' day, I use the word Palestine loosely to describe three regions. You have Judah to the south, where the first-class Jews are. And the Romans and the Greeks describe them also, this area, as Judea. To the north, you have the second-class Jews, the Galileans. But sandwiched in the middle is this region called Samaria. Originally Jews, but over time, and I'll let you look at the backstory to this, we don't have time for that, they intermarried with Gentiles and were looked upon by the Jews, especially in Judah, as a mixed breed. They had lost their place in their race as Jews and became spiritually unclean. The contempt had risen to such a high level by Jesus' day that when a Jew in Judah wanted to travel to visit Jews in Galilee, rather than going through Samaria, they would cross the River Jordan, go up the east side, and then cross back over to Galilee. They had nothing to do with one another. It was that bad. And then there was the women. In Jesus' day, it was a very patriarchal society. Men were here, women were here. And men had their reputation to protect. And to do that, they wouldn't be caught talking in public with a woman. In order to protect their high esteem and their honor, rabbis would go so far as to not even talk to their wives or their daughters for fear that someone would look down at them. And besides, talking about spiritual things to women is kind of a waste of time. You know, it's way outside their wheel well. Ladies, why are you looking at me like that? I'm just the messenger boy. Okay? You see all these cultural walls in place to keep Jesus from this woman. But there he is, talking to her, loving her, reaching out to her. So we have to ask this fundamental question. How did Jesus tear down barriers? And that's important for us to know. Why? We're dealing with barriers today, are we not? I mean, culture is working overtime with the same overbaked issues. Nationality, ethnicity, race, and gender. Culture is morphing it, changing it, doing everything to maintain control of the social narrative. But in addition to cultural walls, we have religious, theological barriers, political barriers, we have psychological, philosophical barriers, academic barriers, scientific barriers, and until like just 40, 50 years ago, we have a wall that didn't even exist. These are technological barriers. Just before I came here this morning, I was watching the news, and did you know people are panicked? They're calling 911 today to report TikTok is down. Crisis! There are ecological barriers, economic barriers, and the list goes on and on and on. It seems today that in order to share the truth of Jesus Christ to someone else, we have to tackle and tear down wall after wall after wall. If anyone needs help today tearing down barriers, it's us. So it's relevant that we take note of what Jesus did to tear down barriers in his day and apply those principles to our lives today to be successful. So, what did Jesus do to tear down barriers? Well, a clue and a hint would be found in the first 4 verses of chapter 4. It says this. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. There's the clue. There's the key. He had to pass through Samaria. But the point is this. Jews don't have to pass through Samaria to get to Galilee. They took the Transjordan route. So why are we going through Samaria? Why do they have to do that? Maybe it's just simply a matter of time. Jesus needed to get to Galilee as quickly as possible, so the shortest route would be to go right through Samaria. Hold your nose and away we go. But if that were the case, then verse 4 should be followed with verse 45. Verse 4 says, and he had to pass through Samaria. So, when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. There you go. We don't need to hear about what happened in Samaria. It doesn't matter. It's not important. The important thing is getting to Galilee, right? But verse 4 doesn't flow into verse 45. There's an entire block of verses that record a most profound message that was given to a woman in Samaria. So it appears that what happened in Samaria was just as important as what's going to happen in Galilee. In fact, that message that Jesus delivered at Jacob's well is inscripturated for us. For 2,000 years, people have been drawn to that well, that record, to hear what Jesus said to her. So what happened in Samaria was not meant to stay in Samaria. It was meant to be shared. And we, 2,000 years ago, we're talking about it today. So when it says in this verse, he had to pass through Samaria, that's not a geographical necessity, as it is a divine imperative. And this is the first thing Jesus did. This is the first step he took. Jesus placed divine imperatives ahead of personal preferences. Do you understand that? If you want to tear down barriers today, that's what you will need to do. You will need to place divine imperatives ahead of your own personal preferences. This was not the exception, it was the rule. When you start looking for divine imperatives, they're all over. They flow, they stream through the Gospel of John. They're translated by the key word must or the short phrase had to. In the previous verse in chapter 3, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he says this, "Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again." That's an imperative. In verse 14, he continues to say, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Another imperative. And we come to our verse that we've just read, verse 4. And he had to pass through Samaria. Also an imperative. And in verse 24 of the same chapter, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. These are divine imperatives. But what do we mean by a divine imperative? Let me offer up to you this definition. A divine imperative is a divine command or urgent need, requiring us to act in a specific way that is essential to fulfilling God's will. That's what an imperative is. when couples reach an impasse in their relationship, it may be due to the fact that one partner really doesn't know what the other partner wants in the relationship. Consider a husband and wife trying to work out their differences. And the wife says to the husband, I thought you wanted financial security. That's why I went to college, got a degree. I'm working hard to bring money home to put food on the table, clothes on our children's back, money for them to go to school, eventually to go to college, to take trips, going on vacation. We're saving money for retirement. I thought that's what you wanted. And the husband says to the wife, that's important. But what I wanted was intimate companionship. I wanted someone to share my life with. But you're not around. You're always working. You're not involved in our kids' life, and you're not involved in my life. You know what I just did, don't you? I switched roles. To prove a point. See, culture demands a place at the table to define the roles for us. You see, culture tells us what's important, what's imperative, what you should or should not be doing, what you should want. Not just for a marriage, but a family, for a community, for government, even for church. Do we really know what God wants in a relationship with us? What's important to Him? Well, let me share with you a sampling of divine imperatives. Here's just a few. Acts 4:12. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Mark 9:35. And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. 1 John 4:21. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. John 4:24, as I've read before. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. What does God want in a relationship? What's imperative? What's important? He wants us to be saved. He wants us to serve. He wants us to love. He wants us to believe. He wants us to worship. These are the divine imperatives that God reveals to us. And they're so important for us to act in a specific way relative to His will. So this is the first step Jesus took. Living and acting according to divine imperatives. Well, that got him to Samaria. It got him to the well. That's the first step. But he has to do more than that if he wants to get into her heart. So what did he do at the well? You see, if he did nothing else, if that's all his goal was, they would have been like passing ships in the night. She would have come to the well, got her water, and left, and not a single word would have been spoken unless Jesus did something else. Now, without having to reread what Eric had read to us at the beginning, I'll just review the bidding. When he got to the well, he sent his disciples away to the town to buy food. That's crucial. Whatever benefit Jesus derived from the companionship of his disciples and strength of numbers, he was willing to set aside for her to meet her needs, not his. Could you imagine what that woman would have thought? Had she started toward the well with her water bucket or water pot, and she sees 13 Jewish men huddled around the well, what do you think she's going to do? She'd probably turn right around and go back into the village. If it meant being alone with her, he was willing to do that. You know, there's a song that says, though none go with me, still I will follow. For her sake, he was willing to set aside his companionship, his disciples, for her. That's just the start. You know, when they left, they took something important with them. There's an old commercial that has a now famous slogan that says, "Don't leave home without it." Does anybody remember what that is? Anyone can say it? What are you not supposed to leave home without? Any loud. That's right. You win the prize. See me later. Don't leave home without it. An American Express card. Well, in Jesus' day when you're traveling, nobody cares about an American Express card, but they do care about water buckets. If you're going to travel a long distance, as Jesus and his disciples were doing, you better have the water bucket with you. Because when you get to the well, you have to have something to draw water from. And some of these wells are pretty deep. I have been told that Jacob's well is 105 feet deep. Now get the picture here. High noon, Jesus is thirsty. He's at a well. He has no way of drawing water from it. Did you know he did that on purpose? That wasn't an accident. You see, Jesus was willing to place himself in need to reach her needs. He was willing to stay there at the well and remain thirsty to quench her spiritual thirst. But there's even more to that bucket. You see, the Jews thought the Samaritan people were unclean, which meant that when Samaritan people touched things, those things also became unclean, like bowls, plates, cups, and, you guessed it, water buckets. So when Jesus said, "Give me a drink," you know what he was willing to do? He was willing to reach out and hold that bucket and risk being thought of as unclean as she was. He's putting all this aside, yielding all of his rights up for her. And then he sat down. It says it in the passage. He sat down. He assumed the inferior subordinate position, that role before her. He lowered himself, sitting on the ground for her. And then he did the unthinkable. He spoke to her. He was willing to give up his needs, his reputation, his rights, his place in his own race, his own society, to reach her. What kind of person does that? You see, this is the second step. Jesus demonstrated the character that is needed to fulfill God's will. And if you're not willing to take that second step, you may be in the presence of those who need to hear the truth, and they'll never get it from you. You see, Jesus made his character a part of the invitation. In Mark, let's go back to Matthew, chapter 11, verse 29. Jesus said this, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." I am gentle. I am lowly in heart. Where will you find me? You will find me at the well. I'm the one who's thirsty. I'm the one without the water bucket. I'm the one sitting on the ground. I'm the one calling out to you. That's me. See, our character is so important. It's part of the appeal. People come to the front door of the church for many reasons. But sometimes they go out the back door for a specific reason. It's our attitude. Maybe it's a perceived attitude, but sometimes perception is more powerful than reality. You see, our attitude can either be a positive factor, a drawing factor, or it could be something that pushes people away. Let me give you an example of an attitude I was hit with years ago. But let me clarify this. I'm not suggesting that this attitude is systemic in the church. It's not. It was just a specific instance in a specific place. And I'm not setting myself up as more holier and better than that person who exhibited this kind of attitude, because I've done worse. Believe me. That being said, my wife and I, when we were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, decided to visit the church that they attended as a family when she was a little girl. It was a big old downtown church, a stone building, much like the First Baptist Church on Yakima Avenue and 6th Street when it was in business. I assumed not too many people would be left, just the old guard. I was wrong. The place was packed. In fact, there were so many people that we were sitting up in about the third row in the balcony. As the service began, the pastor came down the center aisle, and he started greeting people and shaking their hands. That's wonderful! Me like! So I turned around to shake hands with the woman behind me. She leaned back, gave me a frown, and crossed her arms and went, "Ow, that hurt." I don't know what I had just done, but apparently I had crossed an imaginary center line and got hit by an oncoming attitude. As I'm trying to recover from this pain, this emotional trauma, I noticed what I had just done wrong, the error of my ways. When that pastor shook hands, it was not a spontaneous, random greeting gesture. It was strategically placed. Handshaking was part of their church liturgy. He shook hands with the inside person in the first rows. They, in turn, shook persons' hands next to them, and so on and so on. It was like a handshake wave. It went from one row to another, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I broke ranks. I got out of line, and I was punished. Well, I didn't know I was a visitor. And she was not willing to yield the right of way to me, even if it meant rejecting me and making me look a fool. So as the wave continued, I'm watching and I was thinking, well, how's it going to get up to us? We're in the balcony. Lo and behold, the last guy in the back row got up, walked up the steps, and shook hands with the first person in the front row of the balcony. And the wave continued. So when it got to me, I went, okay. I got back in lockstep with the liturgical march. After the church was over, the service was over, I whipped around again to shake her hand. I was determined. I was going to shake her hand no matter what. This time, she received it. The service was over. She was free. And while she's shaking my hand, she smiled and she said, "You're not one of us, are you?" And I'm thinking, and I'm not going to be. You know, attitude is powerful stuff. When used the right way, it's wonderful. When you use it as a weapon, it is horrible. Jesus demonstrated the character that we need to be drawn to Christ. But there are many differences between Jesus and ourselves, aren't there? One of the big differences is this. Jesus was filled with the presence of God's Spirit. We, on the other hand, are transformed by the presence of God's Spirit. See, Jesus did not need to undergo a character change. We do. How many of you like to watch House Hunters? Anybody? Nobody. Oh, there's one hand. Good. God loves you. Okay. There's maybe another. Okay. My wife and I like to watch House Hunters. For those of you who have never seen it, a realtor shows prospective buyers about 3 houses. And you get to understand what they're looking for. You know, what their budget is, what they're looking for in a house, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, do they want it in the city or out in the country? Do you want it on a beach house or on a mountainside? And how close is it to work? Is it going to be their primary residence, vacation residence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And after showing the 3 houses, you try and guess which one they're going to choose. Jan and I are pretty good at this. But sometimes we're totally wrong. In fact, last week, a couple chose a house that was $500,000 over budget. Yikes. But they went for it. Now, sometimes in the show, the realtor will be guiding them, escorting them up to the front door. And before opening the door, she'll say to them, "This house is turnkey," which means there's nothing that you have to do to fix it up. Everything inside is new. It's just move-in ready. And when she opens the door, there's all these oohs and ahs. Oh, my goodness, everything is so pretty. You know, you can see a line of sight all the way through the hallway, the family room, into the infinity pool and beyond to the beach. A house I'll never see. Probably not even to visit. And then they go to one of the most important rooms of the house, the kitchen. Oh, everything is there. And then, of course, there's the bathroom. And then there's the bedrooms with walk-in closets bigger than our bedroom. Everything is done. But then sometimes the realtor would say, before they open the door, "It's a fixer-upper." And instead of the oohs and ahs, there's the ugh. If the house was built in the 70s, that's what you see. Nothing's been done. That same old dark stained green carpeting. What was with dark green back in the 70s or before? What was that? Wallpaper, faded and peeling. Every room is closed off, and then there's the kitchen. The old cracked linoleum floors, no island, dark wooden cabinets that are sagging and breaking off. Laminate countertops. Who has laminate countertops today? Original plumbing. You know that long neon light that's blinking off and on with that corroded plastic cover? And you know what they say? This is a gut job. Nothing is going to say, we have to tear everything out. It's going to cost thousands. Same way with the bathroom. Single sink vanity, a hideous giant pink bathtub. It looks like they were bathing sheep. And what's with carpeting around a toilet? Now, if you have that around your toilet, blessings to you, works for you, but I can guarantee you it's not going to work in my house. Just saying. I'm saying all this because when God looks at my character, he says, "Jim, it's a gut job. We're going to have to tear down your character and build it again, patterned after my son." And I don't think we're exaggerating here. Paul, speaking to the Corinthians, he said, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is passed away. Behold, the new has come." God wants us turnkey. But let's put some balance to this. There's also a verse in the chapter before that I've just read. It says, "And we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit." So picture this. You have a newborn baby. Once and for all, new life. I believe also that life began at conception. But we have this new life. Now that this child has been born, then there are years to follow where the child grows in their new life. They learn how to crawl and then stand and walk and then run. In a similar fashion, when we are born again spiritually, once and for all, there are years in which we begin to grow in our relationship with God. We learn how to walk in the Spirit, live by the Spirit, be filled by the Spirit. Now, if you keep these things in perspective, When are you ever going to be ready to serve, to love, to believe, to worship? You might be tempted to think, well, I have to wait for this maturing growth process until I'm fully mature, which for me would mean I'm never going to be able to serve adequately, or to worship, or to believe, or to love. But here's the good news. God uses us as he changes us. This is so important. We are born again, and it's going to be time for us to grow in that relationship, but we can continue to serve him and love him throughout the entire process. There should be a sign above every church door that says, open during construction. We're open. Pardon the mess. Be a little dust, a little awkwardness. It's like learning how to dance. You've got the two-step. Godly, divine imperatives. Let's see what's next. Oh, godly character, divine imperatives, godly character. And it's going to look stiff and awkward at first. We might even step on a few toes. But after a while, day by day, as you're seeking to live out your life, placing divine imperatives before your personal preferences and seeking to be more like Christ, you begin to glide across the floor. And it becomes second nature to you. So how are we going to tear down barriers today? How are we going to be effective? We need to take these two steps. You know, we're at the beginning of a new year still. Wouldn't it be great if we determined that we're going to follow the steps of Christ throughout this year? Where do you think we're going to be by the end of 2025? And before we call it a day, we've been talking about walls that need to be torn down. But there is a peculiar wall, very difficult to deal with, almost impossible to tear down. It's not a wall culture builds. This is a wall we build. This is a wall I have built. It's not a wall that says to God, I don't need you, I don't want you. That's not the purpose of this wall. You see, most of us can't bear to live in a universe with no meaning or purpose. It's just too overwhelming to conceive that we are just byproducts of a mindless, purposeless biological process. So we need God to provide essence to our existence. We need God to write a story for us of a grand meta-narrative that includes purpose and meaning, that explains who we are, why we are here, where we're going. It's a story filled with love and redemption and destiny and glory, and we need God to include us in that story, and he has. It's called the Bible. We also want a God who's in control. You know how terrifying it would be to be riding in a train or in a ship or a plane, and you go to the cockpit or the bridge of the ship or the engine of the train, and you find there's nobody there. There's no one at the controls. You're just hurtling along according to blind natural forces. We don't want a world like that. It's too frightening. So we need and we want God to be in control, sitting on the throne of the universe. We just don't want God sitting on the throne of our lives. See, that's why that wall is there. The wall that we guard our hearts with is not meant to eliminate God. It's meant to put God in his place. We want a God who's on the other side of the wall taking care of the big stuff, while we are on the other side taking care of our stuff. And just as there's a sign posted above every door of every church that says open during construction, we place a sign on our wall that says private property, no trespassing. Do you know who that's directed to? The God who made you. The God who loves you. The God who will sit at a well and wait for you. The God who will die on a cross for you. That's who you are placing on the other side. Let me suggest a different kind of life to live. Kind of a prelude to taking these steps is to live a surrendered life. A life where there are no walls. Where you take down the sign and you place yourself willingly under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And trust that he will guide you through this year, through the days of your life. And trust that you will come out so much better and enter into glory. So that there's not two thrones. There's just one. And God is the one sitting there. And you're so glad he is. On June 12, 1987, President Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate in front of a wall that encircled West Berlin. And he addressed himself to the Soviet leader, and he said those famous words, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." How would God say that to us? You know, in the book of Revelation, the first 3 chapters, the Spirit has been speaking to the churches. Good things, things that need to be corrected, things that need to be done. And then he wraps it up with an invitation given by Jesus himself. And he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice, I will come into him and fellowship with him and he with me." Maybe this is the day that we start tearing down walls. Let's start with our own. Look at your heart. What have you built? What needs to come down? Only you will be able to answer that. And then step out with Christ. Place divine imperatives ahead of your own prerogatives and seek to be transformed to be like his son. And maybe, just maybe, some of the walls that we are encountering will begin